Okay, let's get started. So today we're going to have a quick recap of the areas that we want to mainly maybe focus on the areas that are crucial, maybe that you should make use of in the remaining hours. So your exam is just around the corner, and this is the time to be now polishing up the areas where you might be lagging, especially the areas that are key. So this is not the time where you maybe go through new topics, but this is the time where we polish up on what you already know, so that at least to make sure those areas we are going to maximize the marks. So let's get to business. So which are the key focus areas where you need to concentrate much on in the remaining time? So the first area that you need to make sure you do put your focus in is the audit risk and the auditor's response. So in the remaining time, it's not very wise to be looking at maybe going through your notes and spending all your time looking at all the areas, but polish up on the areas that are going to be carrying a lot of marks, especially if your knowledge in those areas is a bit shallow. Do quite a lot of questions on these areas. So the first area is audit risk and the auditor's responses. So I will talk about the areas of focus, what you're supposed to talk about what you're supposed to look at in those areas. But the first area, we have audit risk and the auditor's responses. So you are definitely going to get a question on audit risk and the auditor's responses. So it's very important that when you get a question on this area, you will be well prepared. Then also another area is internal controls. It's a very important area as well that is going to be carrying quite a lot of marks in the exam. So you do need to have the knowledge on your fingertips. So again, that's an area we're going to briefly discuss on what you are supposed to look at in those areas. Then also we have substantive procedures. So it's also a regular area for your exam. You're going to find questions on substantive procedures. So you do need to be prepared, especially on how you are going to answer the substantive procedures. Then besides the substantive procedures, another area is evidence. You need to make sure you are well versed with this area. So the evidence looks at how you get the responses. So you are suspecting something as an auditor. How do you get evidence to maybe get to a conclusion of whether your assumptions are correct or not? So we need to be able to know how we gather evidence as auditors. So as auditors, gathering the right and appropriate evidence is important. Then also we'll talk about the auditor's report and modification. So we're not going to be going into detail, but we'll be just focusing on the key areas that you need to maybe emphasize, that you need to put your energy in the remaining time. So also we have the issue of ethics and independence. Is a regularly asked area that you need to, again, make sure you polish up before you get into your exam. Then besides that, it's very important that you focus on application and not cramming, because this exam, if you maybe go through the pass rate for this exam, you realize that it is a very low pass rate. Why? Not because it is difficult technically, but you realize the concepts for most areas, they are easy to memorize, but it's not about you memorizing the knowledge part only, but the exam is mainly application of the knowledge. So the remaining time is not the time for you to spend all your time cramming the syllabus, but learning how to apply the knowledge onto the case questions. So you need to apply the knowledge to the case. So let's get moving. So the first area that is very important that you need to be aware of, that you need to polish up before you get into the exam is your knowledge regarding audit risk. So you are definitely going to get a question on audit risk. So on audit risk, you need to know how to identify a risk. So you get a question saying, identify audit risk and come up with the auditor's responses. So if you're identifying an audit risk, it's very important to take note of the key issues. Number one, we need the risk indicator. So the risk indicator is the first area that shows your application of the case, that shows the link of your response to the case, because the risk indicator is going to be taken from the case. So we need to understand where are you saying there is a risk. So identify the risk indicator from the given case. So you pick the risk indicator from the given case, and just picking the risk indicator doesn't give you any marks. So picking the risk indicator is not what is not the whole answer. It's part of the answer, but it's not the whole answer. So you identify the risk indicator. After you've identified the risk indicator, you highlight it in your solution. So you start, in fact, you start with your risk indicator. Then after your risk indicator, you tell us the accounting treatment. So the risk indicator is telling us the situation we are given in the case that is potential errors and misstatement. The situation that potentially shows that things could be wrong. So what has made you as an auditor to think that things could be wrong? There is an indicator in the case. There's an indicator that you need to highlight. So you highlight that indicator. After you've highlighted the indicator, you tell us what is the right treatment. So they are saying they recorded it this way, but what should be the right treatment? So this requires your knowledge of the accounting standards. So the right treatment is knowing the accounting standard. So you highlight what the standard says. If it's an issue relating to inventory, you tell us about what IS2 says. If it's an issue relating to PPE, you tell us about what IS16 says. If it's an issue relating to provisions, what does IS37 say? If it's an issue relating to impairment, what does IS36 say? So you need to tell us what is the right accounting treatment. So this is an area. Remember, if you're saying this is an indicator, we are saying there's a potential that there could be misstatement. So you are now telling us that provided that there is no error, there is no misstatement, what should be the right treatment? So in your answer, we need that indicator, we need that accounting treatment. Then you move on to tell us what if the accounting treatment was not done, what could be potentially misstated in the case that you are given. So what could be understated, what could be overstated, what could be misstated. Because if you say there is a risk, for example, maybe we are given a case where they're telling us that there is a vehicle that they have in the business which got into an accident. Then you say that's a risk indicator. So the company's vehicle got into an accident. Then you say that's a risk indicator. What does the accounting treatment say? So the accounting treatment says that you don't highlight there, you don't say the accounting treatment, but in your mind, you should know after the indicator, the next step, you highlight the proper way of accounting for it. So you are saying that the company's vehicle got into an accident. According to IS 36, if there is an indicator for impairment, the company should carry out an impairment review. That's the accounting treatment. So you are now telling us that there should be an impairment review. Then you then move to the last part, which is the implication in the financial statements. You're now telling us if the accounting treatment was not done, what could be the problem? Then you say there is a risk that an impairment review was not carried out and the PPE, or if the asset has been specifically mentioned, the vehicle is overstated. So you tell us the treatment, sorry, the risk indicator, that is, there is a vehicle, the company's vehicle got into an accident. According to IS 36, if there is an indicator of impairment, the company should carry out an impairment review. Then you move on to tell us that if the impairment review was not carried out, there is a risk that the vehicle's balance is overstated. So you have managed to incorporate the risk indicator, the accounting treatment, and the implication in the financial statements. We need to know where in the financial statements is it going to affect, where in the financial statement is it likely to affect. So try to follow that guideline. In your answer, just remember the indicator, the treatment, the implication in the financial statement. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to write subheadings, risk indicator, accounting treatment. No, you just put it as, you just combine all the three, but without putting the subheadings. In your mind, you know this is an indicator. Now I'm getting to the accounting treatment. Now I'm putting the effect in the financial statements. Then from there, let's move on to, then there are also certain risks though. It's not all the risks that are related to a certain accounting standard. For example, if we are auditing a new client, that might pose a risk because we are not familiar with the transactions of the client. So in that case, you can tell us the indicator and what could be the problem, but there is no need for us to include the accounting treatment. But as long as it's a risk that relates to accounting treatment, you need to include the accounting treatment. You need to tell us what does the standard say. But if the risk does not involve accounting treatment, it's still possible to get a risk that might not have accounting treatment. Remember, audit risk can be caused by detection risk, by inherent risk, or by control risk. So it's not only accounting issues that can cause a risk. We can have issues such as auditing a new client. We're not familiar with the transactions of the client. So we might end up missing certain errors and misstatements due to lack of familiarity with the transactions. But most of the bulky of the risks, they follow the three steps: the risk indicator, the treatment, the implication. So please bear that in mind as you are giving out your answers. Then let's move on. Besides that, we also need to talk about the responses. We need to know of how to respond. A response that is going to give you a mark is that response that addresses the risk you have identified. The response must give you evidence of whether the assumption you had when you were identifying the risk is correct or not. So when you were identifying the risk, you are not saying there is actually a problem. We're saying there is a possibility that things could be misstated. Now the response is telling us what the auditor is going to do to get evidence as to whether their assumption is correct, as to whether what they thought is right or not. So the response should be directly relating to the risk. The response should be giving us evidence so that we can be able to conclude whether the treatment was correct or not. So please make sure you do give us a response which relate to the risk. So do not give a response that is not addressing the risk that you have identified. And audit response must be addressing what the auditor ought to do to get the evidence, not the management. So it's not addressing management, but it's addressing what the auditor has to do to get evidence. So the response is telling us, how can I get evidence as an auditor? So that's audit risk and responses. So please bear this in mind as you give your answers. Bear that in mind. I need to give a risk indicator, the accounting treatment, the implication in the financial statements. Sorry about the noise. Let me just wait so that okay, let's proceed. So we are saying we need to identify the risk and come up with the response. So each risk that you have identified gives you 1 mark. And each response also gives you 1 mark. So the risk gives you a mark, the response gives you a mark. So it means that if they are, the question says identify 8 risks and responses, and there are 16 marks. It means 1 risk you have identified and its response will give you 2 marks. So it means for 16 marks, we need 8 risks and 8 responses. If there are 12 marks, we need 6 risks and 6 responses. So it's very important that you do stick to the number that is required. So if the question is saying 8 risks, give 8. Don't give 9, don't give 10, because doing so, it puts you in danger of failing to finish. Maybe after you're done and you have managed to complete within the given time frame, you have gone through what you have written and you still have time. Now you can add on the extras, but don't start writing more than the requirement. That doesn't give you any extra marks. So please, if it's 8 risks, identify the 8 risks that are crucial, identify the 8 risks that you want. Then after you've identified those risks, you move to the next. So there is no need for you to try to include all the risks that are given in the case, exceeding the number that is required, because the question will be having more than the number that is required. So please stick to what the question is requested. Stick to the number of risks the question has requested. Now, let's talk about the substantive procedures. So it's also common that you are going to get substantive procedures. So substantive procedures, it's very important to understand if you are giving a substantive procedure, you follow the following steps. So for a substantive procedure, we need to know remember a substantive procedure, this is a test that we are going to conduct at assertion level. We want to prove an assertion. Remember, the assertions are the claims that the management has made. So when the management hands over the financial statements to the auditors for them to audit, the managers are claiming that everything has been recorded in the right period, that is cut off. They are claiming that everything we have recorded occurred, that's occurrence. They are also claiming that we have not missed out any key information, completeness. They are claiming that everything you've recorded exists. They are claiming ownership, rights and obligations. They are claiming quite a number of assertions. So a substantive test, this is a test carried at assertion level. It's a test carried to confirm these assertions. So when you are conducting a substantive test, it could be it might not specify the assertion. It might just say conduct a substantive test on revenue. So you are testing any assertions that are related to the case that involve revenue. That is, if it's not specifying which particular assertion. But you might also get other questions where they specify the assertion. So they will say conduct a substantive test to confirm the existence, a substantive test to confirm the accuracy. So if the question is specifying the assertion, it's very important to make sure your substantive procedure is giving or is relating to that particular assertion. If they say a test for existence, you should give a substantive procedure which is for existence. So don't give valuation procedure if we are testing existence. That would be just a waste of your time and a waste of your energy. But you should give a procedure that relates to what the question is asked. Then number two, so your substantive procedure should relate to the assertion that has been asked. And number two, we need to make sure that the procedure tell us where, what to do, where to do it, and what do we want to prove. As you're giving out your procedure, you need to tell us where is the procedure going to be conducted. So if you are reviewing, we need to know where are you going to check. If you are maybe inspecting, what are you going to inspect? So as you give your substantive procedures, tell us the audit procedure, number one. What is it that the auditor is supposed to do? So the auditor, are they going to review? Are they going to inspect? Are they going to inquire? What procedure is going to be used? So tell us what procedure is going to be used by the auditor. After telling us the procedure, tell us where we are going to conduct that procedure. In your answer, we need to know where. If we are asking, who are we asking? So as the auditor, you ask, who do we ask? You inspect, what do you inspect? We need to know where the procedure is carried out. And what do we want to prove? Especially if the question is not specifying the assertion, we need to highlight which assertion do we want to prove. By the inspection, what do we want to prove? By reviewing, what do we want to prove? What assertion do we want to prove? But if the question is already highlighted, the assertion, we might not need to again say that we want to prove existence, we want to prove valuation, because the question is already stated, conduct a substantive test to test for existence. So it means automatically the test that you're going to provide is for existence. So you might not bring out what is it that you want to prove. But if the question has not specified which assertion do you want to test, you need to highlight in your answer what assertion do you want to prove. Please bear this in mind. So this is one, it will be one procedure with the action word, that is what the auditor has to do, with where the procedure is to be conducted, and what we want to prove. Then there is the procedure for discussion with the management. It's tempting to use, but that procedure is ideal to use if the areas involve assumptions, if the areas involve judgments. So for areas where we already know, for the areas that we already know, for the areas where there is a standard that we are following, we can't ask the managers, you just follow what the standard, check what the standard says. But areas that involve estimations, areas that involve judgments, it might be difficult to maybe come up with a conclusion that this is misstated or this is not. The people that made these assumptions, these estimations, these are the right people to ask the basis for them coming up with that assumption. So this type of evidence where we get from management is less reliable because these are capable of lying to us. But in the event that we are dealing with assumptions, the people that can tell us the basis behind their assumptions are the management. A moment. So the people that can tell us the basis behind their assumptions is the management. So it is the managers who can tell us why they have made a certain assumption. It is the managers that can tell us why they have made a certain assumption. So assumptions, when we want to prove things such as assumptions, we might need to get the information from management. But for the other areas, try to use the other procedures where we put less reliance on management. But if it's evidence through inquiry, it's wise to get the evidence from third parties. You can ask the suppliers, you can ask the bank, you can ask the customers, but asking the management is not reliable since they are capable of lying. So we've mentioned a substantive test is done at assertion level. We want to prove that the assertion that the management made is true or false. So a substantive test is done at assertion level. Then let's move on. Let's look at examples. Let's look at examples. Just a moment, let me pull that down. Okay, let's proceed. So examples of the substantive test. So the first one, we can look at review the purchase agreement. Let's say the question is, I want to confirm that indeed PPE that was purchased belonged to the company. So maybe there are additions to the company's buildings. And we want to confirm, verify that these additions to PPE are indeed for the company. So once there is something within the case that is telling us, again, another issue before we proceed, the substantive procedures should relate to information in the case. So when you're giving a substantive procedure, let it relate to information given. So you can't just start saying we need to review the purchase agreement and agree the names on the documents to the company certificates to confirm rights and obligations when the question has not mentioned us buying any property. So this is used provided that there was an addition to the PPE. So whatever procedure you give, let it relate to something that has been given in the case. The danger with most students is they end up just maybe writing down the procedures that they learned, the rote-learned answers that are not meeting the demands of the questions, that are not aligned to the case. So you need to make sure your answer is relating to the case. Consider whether the procedure you have given, does it relate to something mentioned in the case? It must be relating to something mentioned in the case. That's now applying the case. So if your procedure is just going to be vague without application of the case, might not get passed. Then, so I've said that if you're giving a substantive procedure, there are 3 parts. Let's check in my example if the 3 parts are there. Review the purchase agreement and agree the names on the documents to the companies on the document to the company certificates to confirm rights and obligations. So we are agreeing the names on the purchase agreement to the company's name to confirm that indeed the PPE belongs to us. So the procedure there is review. So to review is the action. Then number 2, where is the action going to be conducted on? So you don't just say review to confirm. What are we reviewing? What is it that we are checking? So the purchase agreement. So why we are checking to confirm that the names of the name of the company and that which is on the document, they are the same. So that you confirm what? So that you confirm that indeed we have the rights over the property. Then discuss with the management the basis used to determine if there was, let's say, an allowance. Discuss with the management the basis used to determine the 5% allowance for receivables in order to confirm accuracy of receivables. So what are we doing? The action is discuss. Discuss with who? We need to know. We discuss with the management in this particular case. And what do we want to confirm? We want to confirm accuracy. So why have we chosen discussion with management in this case? It's because this area involves an estimate. So this area involves an estimate. So areas that involve estimates are prone to fraud and error because they can deliberately overstate or understate those estimates. So an area which involves estimates, you need to discuss with the management so that you understand their basis of a certain treatment. Then now let's move on from the substantive test. So in summary, what can I say about the substantive procedures? So a substantive procedure, it's directed to an assertion. We did look at the assertions. So it's directed to an assertion. So you need to highlight which assertion do you want to prove, and you need to highlight what action is needed and where is that action going to be carried out. So please bring that into open when you are giving your answers. Now let's move on to another area, which is also a key area, that's internal controls. So we'll find questions, the first type of questions, they will say, identify a key control. So we have controls and we have key controls. If a certain control is a key control, it means it is capable of preventing certain errors and fraud from taking place. So remember, controls, these are systems we have in place meant to prevent errors and fraud. So a key control is a control that is capable of preventing major errors and fraud within the organization. So question, you got to identify the key control. You are supposed to, first of all, pick an indicator of the key control from the question. So identify the indicator of the key control. Identify that which you can say, because of this, then we can say there's a key control. Identify the indicator of the key control. Where do you get this from the question? Then, after you've identified the indicator of the key control, you need then to take a step further and tell us, why is it a key control? So the question will say, identify the key control, but your marks do not come mainly because you have picked what you have been given in the case, but your marks are then going to come from you being able to explain why you are saying it's a key control. What is it capable of preventing? And also not preventing in general, but preventing in the company in concern, preventing for the company in concern. It should be relating to the company in concern. So if we have this system in place, what is it capable of preventing? Which errors is it capable of preventing for the company in concern? So please avoid giving answers in general. They should be case specific. They should relate to the case that you have been given. So let the answer be case specific. So tell us, in the case that you have been given, what is it capable of preventing? Now, let's move on. The other type of questions will say, identify a weakness or a deficiency in the system of the client. So if you are identifying a weakness or a deficiency in the system of the client, you need to come up with an indicator of the weakness. So an indicator of the weakness, this is, there's a weakness. What has caused you to think that there's a weakness? This will be given again in the case. So the indicator of the weakness will be there in the case. Something that they are not doing in most cases, that's the indicator. So you don't get marks by just telling us we are not doing this, because it will be given in the case. But the marks then come from you being able to then explain not doing it. What are the implications? What is it capable of causing in the company? If they don't do it, what are the possible issues that can arise to the company? Is it company in general? No, to the company in context, the company we have been talking about. So what is it capable of causing? If we don't do anything about that issue, it's capable of causing problems. Which problems is it capable of causing to the company in concern? So please always stick to the company in concern. As you give your answers, let it relate to the case in concern. That's what makes this subject a bit different from the other subjects. So this one, it's not just going to be your knowledge from the book, but it's more of application to the case given. So you don't pass because you have read a lot of notes, but you pass because you've been able to apply what you read to the case that we are given. You are supposed to be applying the knowledge to the case. Now let's move on. So we have said that if we are saying this one is a weakness, get an indicator from the case. Tell us, after getting the indicator from the case, tell us Why are you saying it's a weakness? What is it capable of causing? Then a recommendation. The recommendation is what must be done. So you identify a weakness. If you have been able to pick a weakness, you should be able to also pick the solution. You can't just pick a problem and not be able to figure out what can be done to solve the problem. So a recommendation then moves on to tell us what can be done to solve the deficiency, what can be done to solve the problem. So a recommendation is not what the auditor should do, but it is what the management has to do. So what systems must be put in place by management? So please take note. Auditor's response is what the auditor has to do, but a recommendation is what the management and the company should do. So don't mix the two. And also another issue, a substantive test, and you can also be required to conduct a test of control. There's a difference between a substantive test and a test of control. In both cases, the auditor wants to get evidence. But if it's a substantive test, auditor wants to get evidence on whether the assertions were correct, whether the balances have been recorded properly. So the auditor is checking the balances. That is if it's a substantive test. But if it's a test of control, you are checking the system that has recorded the balances. So it's not necessarily the balances, but the system behind the recording of the balances. So don't mix the two again. So for a test of control, it's different from a substantive test. We are not going to be talking about assertions here, but we are going to be testing the system that he has recorded. So please be able again to separate a substantive test and a test of control. There's a difference. So a substantive test is directed to the balance. A test of control is directed to the system that has recorded, a system that has recorded the balances. So please take note of that. So that's regarding the internal controls. So now let's move on. Which other area that you might also need to, in the last days that are remaining, what are you supposed to also polish up on? You're supposed to also look at ethics and professional issues. Ethics are an area that is common, especially for Section A. So ethics, there are situations that can indicate threats to the auditor's independence. So they will ask you to identify those situations. So you do need to be prepared, especially with this one. It will normally be just a knowledge question where you are supposed to know what can indicate self-interest threat, what can be the situations that can cause familiarity threat, what can be the situations that cause advocacy threat. So you need to identify, in most cases, which threat is there. They can say they are being offered, there's benefits, what threat is likely going to be affecting the auditor. So you do need to have an understanding of the threats to the auditor's independence. So if this question is to come in the Section B, it might say identify the threats and come up with the safeguards. So if you are the one that is identifying the threat, especially for Section B, you need to highlight the indicator, the situation in the case that is showing that there is a possibility of a threat. You highlight the indicator of the threat, then you tell us which threat is it likely to cause? What is it likely to cause? Is it going to cause self-interest threat? Is it going to cause intimidation threat? Is it going to cause self-review threat? So what threat is it going to cause and why? Why have you said so? So it's not just a matter of you saying the self-review threat. Why are you saying so? What has caused you to think that the auditor is going to be affected with self-review threat? So bring it out, the indicator, also which threat is it likely to cause, and why have you suggested that it is a threat? Then it can say come up with threats and the appropriate safeguards. So safeguards, remember, these are ways we put in place to try to mitigate the effects of those threats, to try to reduce these threats to acceptable levels. So if we are looking at the safeguards, these are ways we put in place which are meant to reduce the threats to acceptable levels. So the safeguard, what the auditor who is likely going to be affected by the threat to independence, what should they do to reduce the threat to acceptable level? If it's the firm that is going to carry out the audit, what should be done? If it's one person, you can just remove them from the team. If they are someone whom, if they are, of course, part of the team, but their threat can be maybe mitigated with other measures, we can, for example, if they're junior, we can just review the work that they've done. So a safeguard must be addressing the threat. A safeguard must be addressing the threat, and all these must be relating to the question. The threat in the question, the safeguard relating to the ethical threat in the question. So please, it's not just a matter of you giving a safeguard, but does it relate to the threat you have identified? And also consider the significance of the threat. So in some threats, you can choose to go ahead with the audit and just implement safeguards. But some threats are too major that we can't implement any safeguards. Rather, we need either to change the senior partners, or we need to decline the audit. So we need to consider the significance of the threat. And even when you're identifying the threat, certain issues might look like threat, but they might not be threats. So it's very important to also consider, is it a threat? If it's something that is capable of causing or influencing the auditor's decision, that's a threat. But if the examiner mentions that it's insignificant, immaterial, those can be indicators that no, the threat is minor. If they say it's immaterial, it's insignificant. Or maybe in other areas, like if maybe we are being taken for lunch and they tell you this is the company's policy that everyone is taken for lunch. So if it's not being done specifically for us, it's not a threat. So it's not an issue of just rushing to say, no, why are they offering them lunch? It's a threat to self-interest. Consider the circumstances surrounding. Is it material? Is it being done for everyone? Consider those issues as well before saying this one is a threat. Also under this area, there's need to consider the nature of the company, the company, whether it's a listed company and it's an unlisted company, because some safeguards differ based on whether is it a listed company or is it an unlisted company. So it's very important to take note of that before you give your safeguard. For example, maybe providing other services for listed companies not allowed, but for private firms, you can go ahead and provide audit and non-audit services. So you need to consider the context. Is it a listed company or is it an unlisted company? Those also are factors that do contribute. Those are factors that do contribute to this type of safeguard you're supposed to give. So please be well versed with this. You are likely to get it for section A and sometimes even section B. So they'll give you a case. In some cases, the threats will be there. They will say, identify which one is violated. So for the threats, that's a key area that I'm flagging that you need to now go and recap on. So at the end of the session, I'll send you through this. I'll send you the presentation so that you can also use it to track the areas. So just make sure you have polished up the areas that I have indicated there. So let's move on. Then in an audit report. So we have questions on audit report. So the questions on audit report, these ones, they require you to, in most cases, they will say that the auditor identified something wrong in the financial statements, and they've requested the management to correct. Then the management can either agree or they can disagree with that amendment. So it's not an issue of just finding the problem, then they keep it silent, they don't communicate with the management. So they've communicated with the management, but the management decided, okay, they are going to go ahead and make the modification. So if the issue is corrected, because sometimes issues could be wrong because of error, not necessarily because of fraud. So if the management agreed to make the change, we might issue an unmodified opinion. So unmodified opinion, we are agreeing with what has been recorded in the financial statement. But if they disagree with the change, we then need to consider modifying our opinion. So if they disagree with our opinion, with the change, in most cases it will be a change. They will say they've identified this and they've requested that the managers make a change to that. So if it's an area that affects the financial statements as a whole, we say it is a pervasive area. If it's affecting all the financial statements, it's pervasive. Then if it's affecting only a few areas, if it's affecting few areas, it's not pervasive. So we consider the pervasiveness of the issue. So if they disagree or they refuse to amend, it's either we'll give a qualified opinion or an adverse opinion. But whether it's a qualified or adverse opinion now differs based on, is it pervasive or is it not pervasive? So if it's pervasive, let's start with if not pervasive. It's maybe just one area. Everything else was correct. It's just that area. It's just that one area where they refused to adjust, but everything else was correct. So it means we have to modify our opinion to a qualified opinion and highlight that on the basis of opinion, why we have given the qualified opinion. So remember, the qualified opinion has an except for paragraph. You are highlighting that everything is all right, besides for this particular area. So on the basis of opinion, highlight why you have said or why you've given that opinion. Then adverse opinion. This is now in the event that you fail. They did not change for quite a lot of areas. So if it's pervasive, a lot of areas have been affected and no changes have been made. So if it's affecting quite a lot of areas, we can say it's pervasive. So an adverse opinion has to be issued. So if we require them to, we highlight them a number of issues that needs to be attended to, but they refuse to attend to them. Or If the issue affects quite a lot of areas, then you can give an adverse opinion. Also, there is an issue regarding evidence. If we don't get evidence for just a few areas, we modify our opinion and we give a qualified opinion, highlighting the basis for the opinion that we failed to get evidence for the areas, highlighting the areas. But if the evidence was not obtained for a lot of areas, we give a disclaimer of opinion. We say if the evidence is not obtained for a lot of areas, then that is pervasive. If the evidence is not obtained for a lot of areas, it's pervasive. So we don't give an opinion, we're giving a disclaimer of opinion. So please also do questions on this one. It's normally the last question. It will be having a case where they will say the management maybe have refused to make an amendment. So I'm not saying it's always the last question. That's for most questions, it's normally given in the end there. Then time management. It's very important that you manage your time in the exam. So you don't pass the exam because you have perfected one question. You don't pass the exam because you have perfected one question. But it's very important that you allocate your time very well to all the areas. So you need to at least use the gauge 1.8 minutes per mark. So it means if the question is 20 marks, just multiply by 1.8. So this will tell you the time you are supposed to spend on that question. If the time has elapsed, move to the next question. If by any chance you finish the other questions and you still have extra time, you then come back to it. Because the moment you spend a lot of time on one question, you are falling into the time trap and you will fail to finish. So this can be attributed to to you maybe having more, putting more points on a question that is 16 marks. You are trying to go, sorry, a question that is 5 marks, you are trying to give 8 points. That in the end can result in you failing to complete the paper. That is the usual case. So please try to stick to the allocated time. So 1.8 minutes per mark. So standard is multiply 1.8 times the number of marks that are given there. That will tell you how long you're supposed to spend on that question. This will give you an allowance of 10 to 15 minutes in the end to review your work and maybe make sure everything is proper. Then let's move on. So when you are writing your answers, it's also just key to remember, keep your answers short and precise. So do give the key issues. So I'm not saying omit important information, but let your answers be short and precise. For a point, let it not go beyond 3 lines. So let the answers be short and precise. And be specific. Specify what you are saying. So if you are specifying, if you specify, it makes your point clear. For example, you don't just say check the documents. Checking is not audit language. It's not ideal to say check. Check is not specific. Checking documents, what exactly are you talking about? So be specific. Avoid using non-audit language. You use review, inspect, discuss, those terminology. Cast, that is audit language. So check is not allowed. So be specific. Be specific, and also you can use bullet points and headings. If maybe, especially for the technical areas, where you are required maybe to give advantages and disadvantages. You can give a small heading and you put your advantage below, a small heading and an advantage below. Separate your points. Separate your points so that we know this is the first advantage, this one is the second one, this one is the third one. So don't just write all the points in an essay form. That's not appropriate. So space your answer. You can put the first advantage, you space to the next one, space to the next one. So that can aid also in you getting the marks. Then common mistakes you should avoid. So the common mistakes you should avoid: writing too general. So writing too general, in other words, you are not applying the test. So if you go through the examiner's reports, it will highlight that over and over, that a lot of students fail because they fail to apply the case. They give rote-learned answers which are not specific to the case. They claim their answers, they claim the substantive case, then they just throw it in there where it's not linking to any case. So your answers should not be too general. They should relate to the case. Try to give case-specific answers. Give answers that relate to the given case. Then ignoring scenario details. So that's one in the same. They give answers that are too general, failing to incorporate the scenario into the case. If it's a risk you're identifying, let it be something that is indeed risky. So there are risks that are too general. For example, you can say there's a risk that they failed to, there is a risk that they failed to calculate, to add up the current assets. It's not really ideal for a large organization. You can't have them failing to add up current assets in most cases. But areas that involve judgments, areas that involve accounting treatment, those are areas that are likely to pose risk. Not that there is a risk that they failed to add the expense, they failed to include the expenses. If it's a company we are looking, they can't prepare the income statement and not include expenses. Unless if they have mentioned that there is a particular expense which might be at risk of not being included, then we can talk about that. So avoid answers that are too general. Find answers that are case specific. Avoid repeating points. So don't say one point over and over. Discuss with the management. For all the procedures you discuss with the management. That's not ideal. So at least use a procedure once if possible. So don't keep repeating the same procedure over and over. Again, another issue is poor time management. So like I've mentioned, students try to end up polishing one question and leave the other questions unattended. Try to balance. You don't pass because you have maybe polished up one question, but you need to make sure your answers, you need to make sure you have done well in all the areas, not just one particular area. So try to balance all the questions. At least it's better to attempt all the questions and maybe not fully attempt them than to do one question and leave the others blank. You won't pass because you have perfected one question. So it's very important to manage your time. Once 1.8 minutes times the number of marks, once it is lapsed, move to the next question. If you're done, then you can come back. So that will help you to ensure that you are going to finish. Then, so I've mentioned avoid leaving answers blank. What causes you to leave answers blank is because of time in most cases. So avoid leaving answers blank. Always attempt every question. So at least write something. Don't leave it blank. At least write something. At least write something. Then for the remaining days, the strategy you can maybe adopt, at least you should do one full paper. If not, even if the mock exam, even if you have done it, you can still redo it under timed conditions. So at least do a full mock exam or a full question paper on this from the CBE practice platform under timed conditions. So you are supposed to set yourself the time, and like I was giving you the time management skills, you try to apply them in that mock. So 1,8 per mark, you multiply by the number of marks, so the number of marks that are there, and make sure by the time you get to the exam, you have felt that environment. You have set that environment for yourself, the exam environment. Then review the examiner's report, just get one examiner's report that you go through so that it can also re-emphasize on the areas that others normally get wrong. So this will help you at least to know is in the examiner's report, I normally consider more the areas where the mistakes that were made by the students. So go to those areas, the mistakes made by students, so that you don't repeat the same mistakes as well. So you need to at least review one examiner's report. Then also practice a lot of procedures. So the procedures are going to be there. So you need to at least tell yourself audit procedures. Then you do at least 2 questions, 3 questions for each of the procedures. Those areas I was mentioning, the key areas, please make sure you practice writing those areas because they are key to the exam. Don't just read. So this is not the time for book knowledge. We are now 2 days away from the exam. You can't spend your time reading the notes. Spend your time applying the knowledge because the exam is not a knowledge exam, but more of application. So apply what you have learned. Put the notes aside. Go to the questions, apply what you have learned. So now spend the remaining time applying what you have learned. So you get closer to the exam, please, the day before exam, that night you should have your sleep. Make sure you do have enough sleep. Don't try to read up to 3 p.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. when you're going for the exam in that morning. Please have enough ample sleep so that you get into the exam while you're fresh. This is an exam that requires a lot of concentration. You have to be applying what is in the case to your answer. So you must at least be fresh. So please make sure as you get closer to the day before exam, you must at least have lighter revision, especially if you have to revise the evening before. You can just use the flashcards or your points that you have been jotting down. Don't strain your mind a lot. So for today, let's end here and wish you the best. So hopefully this discussion has helped you. It has aided in increasing what you have already been preparing. So thank you so much. We'll continue. I think there is no more time for us to continue. So we're going to end here. Then all the best.